Hi, so now you're a public company, and the question often becomes, to what extent can Clifton Douglas or other tax service providers add value? Now that I'm a public company and I have this established tax department that's very sophisticated, where can Clifton Douglas and other tax service providers add value? And really the clean, simple answer to that question is from an administrative perspective. At this juncture, typically the public company has an extensive enough and sophisticated enough tax department to where they can take care of the highly technical issues that come along with being a public company. But certainly even their resources can be constrained when it comes to the amount and the volume that's necessary to put together the tax provision, to file the tax returns on time, to deal with the outsourcing, to deal with the complex and voluminous tax projects that come through the door. And that is really where Clifton Douglas and other tax service providers like us can really assist in terms of helping establish public companies. So if you've looked at our other videos relating to where Clifton Douglas fits in and our assistance with respect to different types of entities as they progress from a startup company to an established private company to a pre-IPO company and then now to an established public company, you'll see this same pattern forming, in which case we evaluate the overall company's tax function really from a four-pronged or three-pronged perspective. And it really starts out with evaluating the tax provision, evaluating the tax return process, evaluating special projects, and then of course the outsourcing, other outsourcing related tax aspects. So with an established public company, when it comes to the tax provision, again, typically an established public company has a sophisticated enough tax department at this time to where they can complete a tax provision for the company. The problem that they run into is that the time that it takes in order to gather the necessary data to complete and put together that tax provision, because it's so voluminous, is just administratively burdensome to them and oftentimes just not cost effective for them to do that in-house. So what they do is essentially bring Clifton Douglas in because we can work with all of the multinational controllers that we need to in order to gather all this data. Because at this stage of the game, when the company is established public company, typically they have a vast amount of foreign operations. And part of the difficulty in putting together the tax provisions themselves is really just gathering the data in a correct format, in a usable format from those foreign jurisdictions. That in and of itself is a huge task. And so to the extent that a company can transfer that work over to Clifton Douglas and have them take care of that so that they can work with the foreign controllers and they can basically assimilate this information and at times educate the foreign controllers in terms of the data that they need and in terms of what format they need this data in, it helps tremendously in terms of putting together the tax provision itself. And also, even though companies are certainly sophisticated enough to put together their own tax provisions, once you become an established public company, your tax provisions are so voluminous and so complex, and you have the amount of time that it takes to stay up on tax law, to stay up on accounting pronouncements is just enormous. So that, coupled with all of the day-to-day operations that are necessary to run a company's tax department, just makes it that much more cost-effective to outsource the whole tax provision itself to Clifton Douglas, because we keep up on all the latest and greatest tax developments and the accounting pronouncements, and we can analyze relatively efficiently how they impact this company's overall tax provision. So again, the tax provision is being done completely and thoroughly, but also from a vent of tax savings opportunities, from tax strategy perspective. It's a lot easier administratively to go ahead and outsource that tax provision to Clifton Douglas or another tax service provider. It's the same rationale with respect to the tax return compliance, because again, the established public company has typically a sophisticated enough tax department to where they can complete the domestic and the foreign tax returns. But the question is, do they have the wherewithal to do that? And that's where Clifton Douglas steps in, not from an international tax return perspective. We typically do federal and all the state returns, but we do it in a turnkey format. If you are familiar with our other videos, we have a very specific video on lifting the burden with respect to tax return compliance. And our whole point in that video is that when a company outsources their tax returns to Clifton Douglas, we basically take their information, we complete all of the returns, we are proactive, we go over the returns with them, have them sign them, we electronically file everything that we can, we paper file everything else, and then we store everything, including all of the certified mailings, including all the supporting schedules that are going to be needed in case of audit, and it's all available on an online room that's available 24/7. So again, we lift this administrative burden, much like we do with respect to the tax provision for an established public company. We lift the administrative burden related to the tax returns from an established public company as well, and it just helps out tremendously. So the point is, it's not that an established public company's tax department can't take care of these specific tax compliance concerns. It's that they just don't have time to deal with the administration that's involved in churning out, for lack of a better term, a ton of different state returns, dealing with all the new federal issues and federal rules that come through the door, dealing with the ever-changing state rules that occur. They just don't have that additional time to do that, and that's where we step in and relieve that burden. Now, also with respect to special projects, the same idea applies, because at this juncture, when a company was smaller, when it was startup or private or even pre-IPO, typically the reviews or the special projects that were necessary were high-level reviews. They weren't these very in-depth, very complex studies that need to be separate engagements in and of themselves, and need to be done by experts that this is all they do, and that are handled from the audit firm as well as other tax service providers. When you become established public company, your special projects become extraordinarily complex. So all of your R&D credit studies, your 382, 383 tax attribute limitation studies, all of your state nexus studies, your transfer pricing studies, and your permanent establishment studies, all of those in-depth studies now need to be done by experts in those areas, either by the audit firm itself, because those typically aren't restricted services, or to be done by another tax service provider. They're just too complex and too voluminous to be handled by Clifton Douglas. But where Clifton Douglas does step in, once again, is with respect to the administrative part of it, because in engaging an audit firm or another tax service firm to do these complex studies, there is a huge amount of administration with respect to gathering data on the company's part, and they oftentimes just don't have the wherewithal to do that in addition to all of their day-to-day work obligations. So Clifton Douglas steps in, and Clifton Douglas works very well with the audit firm or works with the other tax service provider to put together that information that they need to address all of the complex projects information requests, and to put together that data in the form and manner that it's been requested, so that those other companies can, in fact, or those other firms can complete those very complex studies. So again, it's not that Clifton Douglas is now doing all of these complex studies. We really do the high-level reviews. That's the extent of our involvement in these complex studies. Again, if you've looked at our other videos, because we really want to focus on core corporate income tax compliance, like the provision and the return preparation. But we're extraordinarily helpful in terms of knowing the types of data that are necessary to complete these studies, and being a facilitator with respect to assisting companies in gathering that data and eliminating additional administrative burdens with respect to formatting that data in the way that it has been requested by the Big Four firm or other public accounting firm that is in fact going to do the complex study. So it helps out tremendously to have Clifton Douglas step in to be a facilitator and to relieve that administrative burden again. Same with respect to outsourcing. At this juncture, outsourcing becomes extraordinarily complex. It used to be when the company was a startup company or a private company or even a pre-IPO company that maybe they were filing federal and maybe in, 5 to 10 states, but very few states. And when you have that limited amount of filings, really the number of notices that you're going to receive is not that voluminous. Well, now if you're an established company that's operating in 40 plus domestic jurisdictions plus federal, as well as dealing with foreign filings, you're going to have a voluminous amount of notices that come through the door on a regular basis. You're going to need someone to track that information in a very systematic way. And so Clifton Douglas has done that. I mean, we have all kinds of notice trackers. In addition to that, you're going to need someone that really outlines the entire year at a glance. When, of course, your quarterly filings have to be made, what date all of the information packets need to be sent to the foreign controllers, when do they need to be received by, when does the tax provision draft need to be completed, when does it need to be signed off, what's the audit, what are the auditors' due dates, get things to the auditors, when do you actually have to file those quarterly financial statements or year-end financial statements, when does when do the extensions need to be filed, when do the estimated payments need to be filed, when do the original returns have to be filed. All of this really should be established at the beginning of the calendar of the fiscal year, whichever applies, that really assists the company in terms of organizing all of its tax compliance needs. So again, it's not so much that the company's tax department can't do this, it's just from an administrative perspective, they don't have the time. There are other more important things that they need to deal with at the company. And so it's just much more cost effective to assign this over to Clifton Douglas. And really with respect to outsourcing, we take care of all of the day-to-day activities that pop up with respect to the company's Tax Department Outsourcing. I mean, anything from handling, one of the things that comes up quite often is getting a letter of good standing from the Secretary of State's office because there's a problem with filings. And we can expedite that. We deal with registered agents all the time, and typically we can have information delivered over to the Secretary of State's office overnight, and within a day or two have that good standing reinstated, and so the company can go on with its contracts. So that's very helpful. Also, dealing with these indirect taxes, sales and use taxes, property taxes, payroll taxes, questions that come up from the company where they just need someone to do the research and field the answers. All of that, you have another source to rely on that just removes that administrative burden and allows the company's core tax department to really focus on the day-to-day operations with respect to tax that they need to be focusing on. So again, to sum up, even with established public companies, when we're looking at how Clifton Douglas and other tax service providers can be of assistance, it's really with respect to those four areas and really from the standpoint of lifting that administrative burden. We can lift the administrative burden from a provision perspective in terms of gathering data from all the foreign controllers and understanding all the developments and how they apply to the provisions themselves. From a tax return perspective, in terms of taking care of all the administration related to filing, related to storing this information, all of that with respect to special projects in terms of gathering the necessary data so that another specialty firm can come in and actually perform these complex special projects that have grown considerably once the company becomes an established public company. And finally, with respect to outsourcing, really jumping in and helping administratively in terms of dealing with these amounts of notices that have grown considerably and putting together a tax calendar calendar that keeps the tax department on schedule with respect to key filing dates and just dealing with research activities or research requirements that pop up here and there. I mean, and just CFO meetings, tax director meetings whenever they're necessary, benchmarking analyses, forecasting, those types of things that you know kind of pop up for one reason or another, we can handle. And again, it just takes care of a lot of administrative burden from the company so that they can focus on the day-to-day tax department operations at a more granular level. So again, we're here at Clifton Douglas to help from a startup company to a private company to a pre-IPO company, and where we are here to an established public company. It makes a lot of sense to really consider outsourcing the administrative burden with respect to your tax function over to Clifton Douglas. It frees up your tax department immensely. So if you'd like to learn more about how Clifton Douglas can help in relieving this administrative burden as an established public company, then certainly you can visit us at cliftondouglas.com or give us a call. Thanks so much for watching today, and take care. Bye-bye.